What's going on, everybody? C4 here. Welcome back to the channel. And today, I'm going to answer a question that a lot of people have been putting out there on social media, because the relaunch of the XFL this Saturday, there's a lot of people that, unless you're attached to a team on a map, like you live in the same city, or there's maybe one or two players that draw you to a roster, you're kind of sitting in this purgatory. You're kind of clueless right now, cloudy head, trying to figure out what team you're going to support for the XFL. And I have a method, a tried, tested, and true method that I used when the AAF launched. Did this method, came out that I should like the Orlando Apollos. Obviously, they had some Florida Gator ties that made it easy, but the same method had Orlando scoring out the top team. I supported them. They were undisputedly the best team in the AAF, had the MVP in Garrett Gilbert. I think the AAF didn't fold halfway through the season. Orlando easily would have won that league. So this method maybe will help you guys, when it all said and done, select what team you should support in the XFL. I'll give you, in my opinion, a team with the highest score is going to have the best roster, so that could be the team you want to like. Or maybe the team with the lowest score is going to be the team you want to support, the underdog story, and maybe they can surprise and end up being more contenders than pretenders in the XFL. So I'm going to be scoring teams based upon their jersey, quarterback, running back, receivers, which is wide receivers and tight ends combined, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, defensive backs, and coaching staff, which is most of just their head coaches. These are teams that are going to be scored from 1 through 8, 1 being the lowest, 8 being the highest, and we're going to get the final total calculation when all is said and done. Now, the order of the teams that I go through is just completely random, which is how I have them in my Excel sheet. And without further ado, let's get into it with the Dallas Renegades. So when we look at Dallas, we'll start with their jerseys. Again, I don't want to put too much opinion in it, because this is purely opinion. I think the baby blue looks kind of nice, but I'm just confused. Like, what's going on here? You pick like the Houston Oilers colors, even though there's a Houston team that's kind of like the Houston Oilers, but you're Dallas. I was just confused, so I gave their jerseys a 3 out of 8. The baby blue is nice, but other than that, I'm just confused. I'm like an old person lost at the mall. I'm just confused. Somebody please give me assistance when I'm looking at this Dallas uniform. For their roster, we're going to kind of just, you're going to see the grades. I'm going to pop it up here. I just took it from the Wikipedia page. Quarterbacks, I gave them a 6. I think they definitely have an interesting quarterback room. I assume Landry Jones is going to be their starter. Big dog coming from Oklahoma, has some NFL experience with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Eric Dungy was an exciting quarterback from Syracuse, so I'm giving them a 6. Their running back room, I gave them an 8. I think they have the best running back room in the XFL. Cameron Artis-Payne, power back, had a lot of playing time with the Carolina Panthers. Lance Dunbar was before he got hurt, he was a really, really good receiving back for the Dallas Cowboys. I think Payne and Dunbar combined, easily the best 1-2 punch at the running back position. So I'm giving them an 8. Wide receivers and tight ends, I'm giving them a 7. You have Jeff Badgett, who was legit 4.3 speed out of Oklahoma. Josh Ferguson, 6'5", and last year at the Combine at 6'5", he was an LSU transfer, went to a small school. He had like a 4.45 40-yard dash, so height, weight, speed. They have Freddie Martino, spent some time with the Eagles and Bucks. You look at tight end, you have Donald Parham, he's like 6'7", one of those like glorified receivers playing the tight end position. A lot of speed, a lot of receiving ability here for Dallas. I'm giving them a 7 out of 8. I think they had the second best in the XFL. Offensive line is just getting a 4. It's a solid offensive line. Defensive line, I'm giving them an 8. I think they have the best defensive line in the XFL. Frank Alexander, NFL experience. Winston Craig was on the Philadelphia Eagles preseason roster for 2 of the last 3 years. And he's always one of the last cuts for the Eagles. I wouldn't be surprised if Winston Craig is one of the leading sack getters. You have Alohi Kikaha, more of a 3-4 outside linebacker. I assume they're probably playing a 3-4. Either way, really hyped when he was coming out of Washington. Kind of bounced around the NFL, never reached the potential that a lot of people had for him. But I still think there is some talent there in terms of name value. Craig and Kikaha, I can see them being 2 of the most dominant defensive ends, edge rushers in the XFL, so I'm giving them an 8, the best in my opinion. Look at their linebacking core. T. Gray Scales, I had a draftable grade on him 2 years ago when he was coming out of Indiana. Asante Brown spent some time in the Philadelphia Eagles practice squad, so I'm going to give them a 6. The linebackers are, generally speaking, very weak in the XFL, so if I have like one guy that I know is really good, you're going to get a lot of points. DB's getting a 2. Just, Treston Deku, Josh Hawkins, Doan Jibawu had a really good pro day last year, but other than that, not a lot of name value, more questions than answers for the DBs. And their coach is Bob Stoops. Oklahoma got a lot better when Bob Stoops stepped down, so I kind of think he's washed at this point, and just trying to get by on his name value. So I'm going to give him a 4. It's not a bad grade. And overall, for Dallas, actually starting with a very strong grade of a 48 overall points, which is tough for me because there's no way in hell I really want to end up supporting a team from Dallas. But the roster is really, really good, especially at the skill positions. Houston, The Roughnecks will be the next team that we take a look at. Looking at their jerseys, I like the silver helmets. I think the red jerseys are kind of cool with the stars, but their away jerseys, the gray, it's like base gray with red, is hideous. I think it's one of the worst jerseys in the XFL. So I gave it a 2 out of 8. Looking at their roster, we gave their QBs a 3. They got Connor Cook, who was kind of hyped when he was coming out of Michigan State, but fizzled in the NFL. The running backs get a 5. D'Angelo Henderson, Andre Williams, if you're a Giant fan, you'll remember Andre Williams, power back out of Boston College. A lot of power there. It's going to be a team that I think is going to try, and I think their coach is confusing for how their roster's built because they have a very pass-heavy coach. When I look at the roster, I think they should be a team that wants to pound the rock. But yeah, give the running backs a 5. Their wide receivers, they don't have a tight end. Sammy Coates was a wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has the most name value there. I'm giving them a 1. I think they have one of the worst receiving cores, and they have the least names there anyways in the XFL. Offensive line, they're getting a 7. I heard of Genesee, Terry Poole, Sebastian Tretola from Arkansas. I've heard of the second most name value on the O-line, where at this point is pretty much what I can grade. I'm giving them a 7. D-line, I give him a 4. Coney Ely is the big name there on the defensive line, former second-round pick out of Missouri. For the linebacker core, I give them a 3. Carl Bradford is pretty much the only guy I've heard of. Defensive backs, I'm giving them a 4. Marqueston Huff, Ajene Harris from USC, spent some time with the Philadelphia Eagles. Charles James was kind of one of the popular guys when the Houston Texans did that HBO show. Remember that? What the hell's Hard Knocks? He's like always kind of viral, challenging guys to Madden and stuff like that. They have Dietrich Nichols out of South Florida, really solid nickel corner. I'm giving them a 4. It's a solid middle of the park defensive back room. Their head coach is June Jones, very pass happy type OC coach. Spent some time in the CFL. Most notably, he had his biggest success as the air raid in Hawaii. So, assuming that he's going to probably throw the ball 40 times, when yet I think he has one of the better running back stables and the best offensive line, got to be a little bit confusing. But I'm giving it a 5. I think June Jones is an exciting coach. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot, have an exciting playbook, even though I don't think their positions and depth players and skill position players line up to his style of coaching. I'm going to give total, though, Houston gets 34 points. Tampa Bay will be the next team we take a look at. And look at their jerseys. I'm giving them a 4. I thought I'd like their jerseys a lot more. But when I look at their jerseys, it just looks like, generic expansion team. I don't know what it is. I think it stands out. It's distinguished. You obviously get the green. Reminds me of the Portland team from the AAF. But these jerseys just look like, hey, we're an expansion league. And I go, yep, those jerseys look like expansion league. So I'm giving them a 4, middle of the park. Looking at their roster, I thought there'd be a lot more Gators, a lot more Florida, a lot more players on this team that would persuade me in the Tampa Bay direction, but not really. Looking at their quarterback room, they get a 5 for the quarterback room. Aaron Murray has the most name value. Litton and Cornelius, big, tall. They have this. They want 6'5", 6'6" quarterback, but Aaron Murray, obviously, really big legend at the University of Georgia. I think he's going to be a solid quarterback here, which is why we'll give him a 5. Going to the running back room, we'll give them a 3. They have a lot of power back options. Patrick and Smith, Flowers converted quarterback. Mac Brown solid. I think just slightly below average running back room. At wide receiver, I'm giving them a 5. Stacey Coley could be the most talented wide receiver, or at least one of them in the XFL. You look at Tanner McAvoy, he's there, but the big name is on that reserve list. Antonio Callaway is probably the best wide receiver in the XFL. When he's going to play, I don't know, because there's a big question. I can only give them a 5 at this point. They also have DeAndre Goolsby, spent some time with the Gators at tight end. Going to the Tampa Bay offensive line, I've heard of Martez Ivy. That's about it. Feels like a fairly weak offensive line, so we gave it a 2. D-line gets a 3. CeCe Jefferson. Nikita Whitlock was a two-way player for the Giants, played fullback and D-tackle. They'll get a 3. I think it's a fair grade. Linebacking core, give them a 2. Reggie Northrup from the AAF is the only way I've heard of any of these linebackers. Their DBs, though, are getting an 8. A lot of talent there in the secondary. Jalen Collins from LSU, he was really, really good before he had some off-the-field issues. Micah Hanneman, solid safety. Hurst, Tarvarish McFadden, Corey Moore. A lot of NFL experience here in that secondary. I think they have the best secondary in the XFL. Their coach, I'm giving him a 6, as they have Mark Trestman, just somewhat recently from the NFL, an offensive mind. I think that they definitely going to be a competitive team, and they're going to get a final score of a 38. New York is up next. If we're grading it by logos, I think they have the best logo in the XFL. Their jerseys are getting a 5. I think their black jerseys kind of remind you of Ohio State. I think they're sick, but their aways, the gray is like very hideous. Hurts their jersey score, but those black unis are absolute fire. We're giving them a 5. Breaking down their roster, we're giving their quarterbacks a 2 out of 8. Very weak quarterback room. Matt McGloin, not good. Luis Perez, is he going to be their starter? He was really hyped up in the AF, kind of actually underwhelmed. He was like, what, Div 2 Heisman or something like that. I'm very uncertain about their quarterback room. I'm giving them a 2. Running backs get a 1. Literally have never heard of any other running backs. Their wide receivers are getting a 2. I've heard of Mikhail McKay, EJ Bibbs. That's about it. Keenan Brown, actually, Texas State Bobcat. Wide receiver, one of those glorified wide receivers playing tight end. Either way, very weak wide receiver receiving room. I'm only giving it a 2. For their offensive line's getting a 3. I've heard of Garrett Brumfield. I've heard of Damian Mama. I've heard of Avery Young. It's kind of, again, I'm kind of copping out here when it comes to the O-line, but they're getting a 3 when it comes to the offensive line, almost bang on average. Defensive line's getting a 1. I've heard of Joey Mbu. That's it. That's it. I think they have the worst defensive line in the XFL. Linebacking core, however, is getting an 8. Nick DeLuca, North Dakota State. Frank Gidda, NFL experience. Ben Heaney, NFL experience. D1 Hines, NFL experience. I think they have the best linebacking core in the XFL. They're getting an 8. DB room's getting a 1. Askew Henry was kind of okay at West Virginia. I've heard of Demetrius Cox. I've heard of Jamar Summers. That's about it. So a very weak defensive back room. And for their head coach, they have Kevin Gilbride, old man from the Giants. They are getting a 2. I think they're the second worst head coach in the XFL. Very uninspiring hire, which gives them a grand total of 25 points. I'll tell you that right now, the lowest out of all of my scores here in the XFL. At last is New York, which sucks because their logo is pretty fire. The LA Wildcats are up next. This was a team I have been kind of leaning towards before I did this video. Looking at their jerseys, I'm giving them an 8. I'm not a huge fan of their aways. Remind me of Bucks Creamsicle, which is, in a way, it's kind of cool, even though I'm not a huge fan. But the red, black, and orange jerseys, best jerseys. One of the best logos, best jersey in the XFL. I'm giving them an 8 for their uniforms. Can their roster match up? And looking at the roster for the quarterbacks, I'm giving them a 7 because I think Josh Johnson is probably the best quarterback. They might have the best quarterback room, but I think if we're just saying for one quarterback, which, I mean, you probably only should grade on one quarterback, Josh Johnson, NFL experience, probably out of all the quarterbacks in the XFL, could go play in the NFL and succeed at a higher rate than anyone else. So I'm giving them a 7 there in the quarterback room. Running backs are getting a 2. Just not a great running back room. Dewan Harris, Elijah Hood, more so power back options. At wide receiver, they're getting a 4. Saeed Blacknell, Trey McBride, a speedster. Nelson Spruce, pretty good slot, but not a lot at tight end. So I don't know what's going on with this roster. It's not really filling out, so a 4 there. Offensive line's getting an 8. I think they're the best offensive line. Khalil McKenzie, Storm Norton, Tyler Romer, Nico Siragusa. I've heard of all those guys. Pretty solid from inside out. Defensive line's getting a 7. Sean Oakman and Devin Taylor, I think, could be. Obviously, Oakman brings a lot of name value. But in terms of proven NFL, Devin Taylor did his thing for the Detroit Lions for quite some time. So I'm giving them a 7. I think they're the second best defensive line after the Dallas Renegades. Linebacker core is getting a 4. Okay. Got some NFL experience there for sure. Gauss, I've heard of him. Defensive backs getting a 3. Jerome Copeland, big hitter. Spent some time with the Philadelphia Eagles. Harlan Miller, NFL experience for the Arizona Cardinals. Arian Spriggs from Oregon. Tosho has some NFL experience. So it's just a right about average secondary for the XFL, which gives them a 3. And their head coach is Winston Moss, and he's going to get a 3. Again, just kind of like an average coach. Had some big role and responsibility for the Packers when he was in the NFL, but right about middle of the pack for me, which gives the LA Wildcats a score of 46, which right now, though so far in this video, is second to only the Dallas Renegades, and I can't cheer for a Dallas team. So right now, for my opinion, LA is at number 1. We got 3 teams left. Next up is St. Louis. I gave their jerseys a 1. I think the helmets are kind of cool, but for a jersey color, it's just boring. Really, really boring. Nothing memorable with the jerseys. Worst ones, I think, in the XFL. Taking a gander at their roster, I think their roster is also very unimpressive. Quarterback room, I'm giving them a 1. They just have a bunch of college quarterbacks that never really caught on in the NFL. Nick Fitzgerald might be the start. I don't know. He's a dual threat. Looking at their running back room, I'm going to give it a 6. I actually think it's Matt Jones and Christine Michael, so NFL experience for sure. Michael could be the best running back in the XFL. So we'll give them a 6 there. Good score. Receivers are getting a 3. They have Carlton Agudosi. He's like a 6'6" wide receiver. Spent some time with the Eagles. Pearson L. Could be one of the better production type guys, but still it's an average wide receiver core. We'll give him a 3. Offensive line gets a 1. I've heard of D1 Allen, the guard center from Hawaii. That's about it. Defensive line for St. Louis gets a 2. I've heard of Will Clark. That's it. One guy, again, not a lot of name value. Linebacking core gets a 5. Terrence Garvin was a monster in the AAF for my Orlando Apollos. A lot of interceptions, really productive player. So I'm going to give them some AAF score, a little AAF boost, a 5 at the linebacking core. DB room gets a 7. Will Hill might have the most name value. He's like, I'm pretty sure he was like a Pro Bowler in the NFL, but had a lot of off the field issues. Was a part of that old school Tim Tebow Gators team that, we don't want to talk about anymore. Harold Jones Corti had some NFL experience as well. So a 7 for the DBs, but their coach is going to get a 1. Jonathan Hayes, the least known, least qualified coach, I think, in the XFL. So for me, I'm going to plead a little bit ignorance and only give him a 1, which is a grand score of 27 points for St. Louis, currently having them as the second lowest scoring XFL team. Only lower team is New York. Seattle is up next, and I'm going to give their jerseys a 7 out of 8. Their jerseys actually really remind me of the Orlando Apollos in the AF. I think it's pretty cool. The orange and blue, it matches well. Their helmets look kind of cool. So, hey, I'll give them a good score there, 7 out of 8. Good start. Now, breaking down their roster, I'm going to give Seattle a 4 at the quarterback room. They have Brandon Silvers, who I actually think could be BJ Daniels, more of a dual threat. But Silvers from Troy actually had a draftable grade out of him a year or two ago. So I think that interesting. A lot of questions, uncertainty over that quarterback room. So it's really middle of the park. At running back, Kenneth Farrow was a monster in the AAF. So I'm going to give them a 4. Again, middle of the park there. Wide receivers for Seattle is getting a 6. Austin Prohl, Keenan Rellions, Kassan Williams might be, again, in that conversation for maybe the best, most talented wide receiver. Kassan Williams dominates the NFL preseason, it feels like, every other year. So I'm giving them a 6 there for the receivers, even though there's not a lot of talent there at that tight end position. Offensive line for Seattle is going to get a 5. I've heard of Isaiah Battle. He was a supplemental draft pick, I remember, for the Rams. I've heard of Cyril Richardson as well. So we're going to give them a 5. Defensive line is going to get a 5. Marcel Frazier played for Mizzou. Maponga has NFL experience. Will Sutton might be the most talented defensive tackle in the XFL. Was a monster when he was at Arizona State. So they're going to get a 5 for the defensive line. Linebacking coach getting a 1. Never heard of any of these linebackers. DBs are getting a 5. I've heard of Jeremy Clark. Godwin Igwebuike is pretty solid. Cisse, I think he played for Nebraska. Channing Stribling was actually really good in the AAF out of Michigan or Michigan State. I think he was out of Michigan. So yeah, you get a 5 for the DB room, and their head coach is Mr. Jim Zorn. And I think Jim Zorn, trying to get the stank off of his end of his tenure at UCLA. I'm giving him a 7. I think he has a good pedigree, and I think it's going to be a well-coached team. So that gives Seattle a score of 44 points, which currently has them at 3rd place, only behind Dallas and LA for our highest scoring XFL team. And then we're down to 1, DC. Looking at the jerseys, the DC Defenders, I'm going to give them a 6. I feel like this is like what I'm now looking at. It's a little high, but it's just unlike St. Louis, where it was just basic and plain. At least this kind of stands out. The all red and white is a safe jersey combination. Their logo looks pretty cool on their helmets. I give them a 6. Now looking back, that might be a little bit high, but it's not a bad. There's nothing really you could nitpick about these uniforms outside of the fact they look like Indiana. So I'm going to give them a 6. Looking at their roster, it's a pretty damn good roster. Quarterbacks, I'm giving them an 8. They have the name value. They have my boy Tyree Jackson. They have Cardale Jones. I don't know who their starters are going to be. If it is Tyree Jackson, I think his upside, I definitely had a draftable grade on him. I don't want to come out and say he's the most talented quarterback. I think he has the most upside out of all the quarterbacks in the XFL to eventually go on and become a guy that can go play in the NFL. So I'm giving them an 8 for the quarterback room. Running backs with Jarrell Pesley, really good receiving option. They have Donnell Pumphrey, which is, I don't really want to talk about that as an Eagle fan, but there is talent. There's definitely a style of running back they've established here on this roster. I'm giving them a 7. Wide receivers, I think they have, without a doubt, the most talented wide receiver group. I'm giving them an 8. Simi Cobbs, huge fan out of him. I'm excited to see him play. Malachi Dupree out of LSU. Eli Rogers spent some time as like a starting slot wide receiver for like 2 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Rashad Ross was like an AAF All-Star. They have DeAndre Tompkins, who's a UDFA on the Eagles, really, really fast. They have Ernsberger, who's more of a fullback, I think, in the NFL, but easily the best wide receiver room there, getting an 8. Offensive line, I'm giving them a 6. I've heard of Cole Boozer, Malcolm Bunch, Dorian Johnson, John Toth, and DeAndre Wesley. Easily the most names I've heard on the offensive line, so they're getting a 6. Defensive line is also going to get a 6. Kenny Bigelow from West Virginia. Jay Bromley has NFL experience. Sam Montgomery has NFL experience. Elijah Qualls played for the Philadelphia Eagles for 2 years. Really good run stuffing D tackle out of Washington. So they have a good mix of run stuffing and edge rushers, so they're getting a 6. Linebacking core is getting a 7 with Jonathan Massaquoi. Scooby Wright's the big one. He might be the best linebacker in the AAF. He was a college legend for Arizona Wildcats, so I'm giving them a 7. DB room gets a 6. They have Matt Elam, former first-round pick, Florida Gator. He's solid. Dorian Grant, Tyree Cannell, Raheem Moore, Shamarko Thomas, another Pittsburgh Steeler. They have a lot of NFL experience here in the secondary with some upside, so they're getting a 7. And their coach, I'm going to have to give him an 8, Pep Hamilton. I think Pep Hamilton got kind of a raw deal, but he's the man that came to the NFL to be the guru, the speaker, the whisperer to Andrew Luck, following him from Stanford. I think he, out of all these coaches, might be trying to use the XFL as a body of work to get back into the NFL more so than any of the other names here. I think probably Winston Moss could be another one, the Wildcats coach. But with the 8 for Pep Hamilton, for DC coach, it gives them 62 points. So far and away, they are the highest scoring team, in my opinion, in the XFL. They are DC. As an Eagles fan, it is tough for me to cheer. So really, for me, it's between DC and LA. I kind of knew that coming into this video. I mean, they're in separate conferences. I can cheer for LA in the Western Conference. I can cheer for DC in the Eastern Conference. But I'm going to have to, I don't know. I feel like DC's... I'll tell you right now. If Tyree Jackson is the starter for DC, I'm going to like DC. If not, I might have LA be the wild card, and it'll give them a slight edge. But for my opinion, for my money, that is the best team. The DC Defenders are the top team in the XFL. What do you guys think? Hopefully you got something on this video. What team are you going to support in the XFL? Let me know in the comment section below. As I said, we're going to get back to the rebuilds and debut episode of the brand new franchise mode this weekend. So thank you guys for watching. And until next time, it's C4 saying peace out and go XFL.